Welcome back to another episode of In Systems We Trust. My name is Marquis. I'm your host, and today I'm speaking with Kevin Dominik Korte. Kevin is a technology executive, board member, and IT innovation and growth specialist. Kevin dedicates himself to inspiring people to take control of their time, data, and dreams in IT, business, and life. He has a strong track record for harnessing commercial acumen with finance expertise to deliver large-scale technology programs. His focus is to help companies adopt leading edge security, cybersecurity, and automation practices to turn IT from a hindrance into an asset for every organization. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Great to be here.
So good to have you. I'm looking forward to diving into this conversation and talking about identity management and cybersecurity and really just understanding how this plays a crucial role in the landscape of organizations today. And so I'd love to understand and just take a step back and give you a chance to elaborate on just your background and your career and your expertise and really how you got to the place that you're at today.
I'd love to. I mean, we
Sure.
all have a big history and long time, and I've been 10 years now in this country, which someone has to remind me this year actually that it's that long. But it started all out in college when we had the first social medias coming up and people were excited about it, sharing, and as it's still the case, oversharing.
Mm.
And we then had the first cyber attacks based on it because people shared like, oh, that's my first car. And what do banks like to ask you for resetting their password? Oh, what's your first car? Or
Yeah.
what's your dog? Or where did you meet your spouse? And
Mm.
all these we love to share. And that kind of got me into the question of, okay, what do we actually do with our data? And there's not much more important data than our identity, both in terms of the login we use at work, but also in terms of who we actually are. And I've been staying with that since then, and I'm happy to be here to talk more about it.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm glad to explore it a little bit more as well. So let's start by talking about Univention. Like that's been a big focus of your career. Can you start us off by maybe talking about the company's mission and how it's maybe evolved over time or since you got started?
Absolutely. I think most of us start our work day very similar, at least if we work in an office job. We put in a
Mm.
username and a password as a computer, or we do that right after getting the coffee, depending on who we
Yes.
are. And then we repeat that dance over and over when we log into our email, when we log into our CRM, scheduling software. And that's really an annoyance. So our mission is to make it, first of all, for the user easier that we only have to do that dance of entering a login once, but
Mm.
also for the admin who, in the worst case, when we come new into the company, has to make sure our name goes into our computer, into the email system, and so on and so forth. And I think there's no one on this planet who says, I love doing double data entry or triple. And given how much IT experts are needed and from a company perspective, how much they are paid,
Yeah.
you really want to minimize their stress and minimize the time spent on these routine tasks. So our mission is to make it possible for the right user to get easily into the right system and to the right applications.
Are we talking about directory syncing and single sign-on and things of that nature?
Yes, directory
Yeah.
sync is a
Okay.
big part, and single sign-on is always the goal for everyone because I think 30% of Americans would rather not do an important task than to enter a password again.
Yeah.
So let's get rid of the password entry as much as possible.
Can you break this down a little bit? Because yeah, we're talking about single sign-on, and so if you are synced to a directory either through Microsoft or Google or whatever organization governs your logins and your user information, can you talk about that versus standard passwords that we all know and love or don't, versus pass keys or pass phrases, which I'm hearing a lot more about these days? Can you talk to use cases or why you would use one or the other, and how secure some of them are versus the other? Would love some more information there.
So there are really two parts you touched on. One is the single sign-on aspect, which gets away with the sign-on. So typically your computer gets kind of a relatively long cryptic token, which it uses to log you into the next application after you successfully proven who you are once. And that's a single sign-on aspect. So the user sees one sign-in, even though the computer does it in the background multiple times. And really, the advantage of single sign-on is that the less you have to do and the more comfortable it is for you, the more likely a person is to use something which is secure, whether it's waiting for an SMS for multi-factor authentication, plugging in something, or even in the least secure way, enter a very long, complex password. On the flip side, if you have to enter the password 5 times, and I'm guilty of that, I make my password exactly the 8 characters the website wants me to if it requires me to enter it over and over again.
Right.
The other thing,
No, go on.
Yeah, the other thing is pass keys or token authentication, SMS, multi-factor, which really makes that one login more secure because you have not just something which is your password, and which is really limited by how we as humans perceive randomness.
Yeah.
If I give you a password with 6 A's and 10 characters, you will be like, that's not secure. And from a computer perspective, that's as good as having all characters different. But the multi-factor gets away from this kind of limitations on our brains and either uses something, like our phone, or a key, a token, or biometrics if we really want to share that.
Got it. Okay. Can you expand more on what Univention is? Would it be similar to, say, implementing a 1Password or LastPass or NordVPN or NordPassword solution in your company?
I think the biggest competitor we have, and the one we really need to beat, is Microsoft Active Directory.
Okay.
So it's really the central directory services, the login, the authentication part in the directory, and then also a bit of the platform. So if you're a small company, getting it easy to get the applications on, because as much as we like working with directory, the end user hopefully never gets to touch with it more than the login dialog.
Right. Can we focus in on identity management? Like, I find this particularly interesting. Can you explain why you believe this is such an important aspect of cybersecurity?
It's the access. It's kind of asking, why do you believe keeping your key in your pocket and not on the doormat or under the doormat is important to keeping your house secure? There's quite a lot of it to see how people deal with logging in, deal with the security aspect. And on the flip side, it's 80% of all cyber attacks still work via the person. So it's either grabbing a password or getting someone to install a keylogger or something which gets them in. And so if you have control of your identities, if you make sure, okay, you have to be a real human, you have to be sensible about logging in and not, okay, oh, well, he just logged in from Seattle and now he's logging in from Hong Kong. Makes perfect sense.
Right.
And this kind of meshing the computer between our chairs and keyboards, which has often others' idea of what's important.
Right.
That's kind of the bread and butter of identity management and of bringing it in. And making sure that, first of all, the admin isn't overwhelmed with it, that everything works, especially on the first day someone comes in, they don't want to run 3 times. Okay, this login is wrong. This email is wrong. But also when someone leaves the company, which is maybe even the more important part, you want to make sure they can't log into your systems. They don't have any data anymore, and their identities don't work anymore.
Right.
So that's kind of the two flip sides of beginning and end of it.
Got it. And so in the example you just gave, like just thought about the Hong Kong, versus Seattle login. Do VPNs, are they redundant then in this process, or are they a hindrance to effective cybersecurity? Because someone could, sign in, they could be in Seattle and need to log into customer data that is in Hong Kong, and it's more effective. It's easier for them to go that route and use a VPN. How does that play a role in everything?
So VPN is a different kind of protection. A VPN kind of builds a bubble, or gives you a way into a bubble. Kind of. So if you think in networking terms, your computer network, whether it's at home or at work, is kind of blocked off with a firewall and then a router which connects then your network to the internet, and the VPN gets you a way through the firewall into the system. So that might enable you to log in the first place. It might be that some of the systems are reachable without a VPN, but yeah, the VPN gets you into the network. It
Right.
hopefully doesn't get you to the data, because even if you're in the network, your engineers might or should not be allowed to deal with human resource data. Your human resource department, on the other hand, shouldn't download the finance projections from the finance department. And naturally, you don't want the engineers to update the finance documentation or the invoicing.
Right.
So each of them has their own identity, their own groups, and their own responsibilities. And that's kind of the part where the identity management comes in,
Of
keeping
course.
these separate and giving everyone access to the right data.
Right. Yeah, of course. And you had mentioned, the only reason I asked that is you had mentioned like the admin being overwhelmed, right? And so in this case, if it does show up on a log that someone was in Seattle and then they're trying to log into Hong Kong, it's quite possible that they were using a VPN to change their location. Would something like that be understood by the admin or by the software? Or would that, throw a whole wrench in the system?
In the end, that depends on how you compress it down. If it's a
Okay,
regular occurrence, you can just say, okay, that's an exception which is
I see.
valid for someone working with the customer data.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you have possibly your HR specialist, for them it's not valid to do that, because they really should only work either from
Mhm.
home or from the office.
Okay.
So that's the other thing. You have to make it easy to build kind of groups, and to keep in mind that probably if you have one engineer who does it, at least if you're big enough, you have 20 of them. And
Yeah.
once your customer goes away in Hong Kong, you might need for all of them to remove that exception.
Right.
And that's the
Okay.
other aspect of identity management, to do the group-based thinking.
That makes sense. I'm really curious to know, because you spend so much time in this world, have you, how bad has it gotten for you, or how bad have you seen these situations get out of control where there is a breach? Are there any stories you can, share with us on, what happened and maybe actions you took? Or yeah, I'd love to know. Very curious.
It's very interesting to see breaches nowadays, because especially with changes like ChatGPT making AI available, making language
Mhm.
models available, it's very easy to get this combination of user identities of how we are. So we recently had a customer breach where a 16-year-old, I think he was at that point, just bought data from the darknet of breaches at shopping sites, and then went into LinkedIn, found out, okay, that's the engineer. On LinkedIn, he found, okay, that's his private email, that's his work email, that's his other private email, and then went through the data. Okay, here are the 6 passwords which have been breached, and then built a or had ChatGPT built the password he will probably use at work. And
Wow.
that's been a known attack for years, but beforehand it was like a human needs to look at it and see, okay, this is the pattern he has in his mind. That will be his likely password. And now with AI, he did it for thousands of people and quickly found one where he logged in with a valid account without having to try multiple different passwords. And that's really a difference we face now, that these attacks used to be, a human needs to look at it. So you first need to find a target valuable enough to do it.
Mhm.
And now it costs them I think $12 to do it for thousands of people. And
Wow.
so the value of the target can be a lot lower than someone who has national security data where it's still a human can
Right.
do it.
So I just want to confirm what you said regarding ChatGPT. So you said that this person was able to, kind of get around the back end of some system, pull out standard passwords and emails that were used on various logins, and then feed that into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT estimated or created a profile of what their work password could look like.
Yeah, what the most likely work password would be.
Wow. And it was successful in
It
this
was, at
case?
least in the case for our client, was successful. And then they got their cybersecurity guy in to analyze it. They found the guy.
Yeah.
And then it's like the movie starts, okay, you either go to jail or work for us.
Yes.
And then we had a post-mortem of, okay, how can we change the login sequence to make it more secure to prevent these kind of attacks?
That is so interesting. And that was my next question. Have companies ever hired you to go in and test their security for these, inconsistencies or potential breach opportunities?
We typically then work with external consultants, because if you're the one who provides the software and the one who tests it, you have a bias in your mind
Sure.
of, okay, that's the way we would go in there. So, but yeah, we have been hired to do that, but we then normally subcontract it for someone who doesn't work with that every
Mhm.
day, and someone who has then also the very creative ideas of how to attack these things. And it's still a lot different. We of course do penetration testing internally, but that always goes more into the part of, okay, how secure is the software as in the source code?
Mhm.
Versus if it's a client, I've seen people go and say, hey, I need to check your email account. Can you quickly log in and then look over the shoulder, have the password?
Yeah.
And these kind of old school attacks
Oh
where,
man.
okay, if you see someone in front of you and trust them, they can do a lot of bad things. And I think of 5-6 years ago was popular for one of our contractors to just go in with Google Glasses and record the whole interaction.
Oh
No one
man.
sort of questioning it, because he was just a geek guy who tried out the new thing. And no one thought,
That's
okay, he's recording the whole conversation.
That's terrifying. Yeah. I mean, so many things that are emerging now as far as technology that we're not considering and the implications around using that technology. Um, for me, I mentioned to you before we started recording that I used to own a marketing agency. And so years ago, I was subject to a breach of my Facebook ads account for the agency. And so this third party logged into my Facebook business manager. There were multiple admins on my side, but they started running ads for different businesses and companies across the world. Spend was in the thousands per day. And I was able to lock it down after, about a week or so, but I had to prove to Facebook who I was and then somehow regain access to the Facebook account and the business manager, and Facebook was not helpful at all in this entire situation. So, like, that's one example of something that has impacted me directly. And now, and a lot of the listeners here, like, a lot of us work remotely, right? We have, whether you're a digital nomad or you have a hybrid, work environment, or you're full-time working remote. So what are some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves from, a lot of these vulnerabilities that seem to exist around online, workspaces? Like, I have a VPN set up all the time. We use one password, internally, but I can't be there, with a team member who's traveling through Eastern Europe, to make sure that no one's peering over their shoulder, or to make sure that, you know what I mean? So like, what are those bare minimums that we should all be considering around cybersecurity, and how can we really protect ourselves?
I think the first thing is never assume it can't happen to you.
Mm.
That's as stupid
Yeah.
as it sounds. We like to always believe we are the smartest person in the room and think of, okay, how can he be so dumb to do that?
Yeah.
And that's important both from a point of view of how you handle your security, but I think it's also important from kind of managing people who has had it happen to them, if it's your employees or your customers, to say, oh my God, my website has been breached, or someone logged into this account you set up for me. And that's, I think that's the first step. And then on the technical side, multi-factor authentication, preferably with a key and not with an SMS. So YubiKeys are, I think, the most popular ones are,
Okay.
I think, a must-have, especially if you travel around the world and get to different networks and or work in coffee shops, work in hotels, where
Mhm.
you're really not in control of the network and where you might not be able to route everything to your VPN because it's just a latency issue then.
Sorry. So even if you have a VPN running, it might not be able to route everything through it because of latency. Is that what you said?
Video calls are, I think, the best example of what is hard to do with a VPN. So you might have like hybrid scenarios where some stuff goes over the VPN, like your accounting software or your customer data, and then you have a meeting with someone where you might use the same login details,
Yeah.
but it doesn't go over the VPN because we would be sitting here like chup, chup, chup,
Right.
and everyone
Yeah.
would be like, yeah, waiting for you to actually say something while you wait for audio to come through.
Okay. Can you speak to how quickly, breaches can happen? Because like for me, sometimes I'll go to a coffee shop, and so I'll find myself at a Starbucks or a McDonald's or like a hotel lobby or an airport lounge, right? And sometimes I'll log onto the Wi-Fi. I'm working for, 5, 10 minutes, and then I remember my VPN's not on. Am I already like, it's already too late, right? If I turn it on at that point, they've already gained access, right? Like, am I protecting anything at that point, or?
Um, it's probably the question of who you are and what you do. If you work with dual use goods, if you work in building military hardware, then
Sure.
might be too late. If
Okay.
you're in the advertisement space, then
You're not a high risk target.
you're not a high risk target. So
Yeah.
in that sense, you're more like if someone sits there and tries to get data from everyone in the lobby and then see, okay, someone is
Hmm.
accessing their bank website without the little HTTPS at the top because they haven't updated their computer since 1995.
Yeah.
Then
Um,
these are then the kind of the drive-by targets, not the ones who. That's kind of in that sense keep your system up to date and keep up with changing your password, making it longer, making multi-factor the basis. Um, then all these kind of okay. You need a high secure VPN. You can't use public Wi-Fi. You need to use encrypted phones. So that's kind of okay. Where is the how much of a target am I really? Um, but yeah, as we saw with the example of the login, that's also changing of okay,
mhm.
what really is the cost of the data of me breaching you versus what's my reward there?
So you're saying I'm not that important. No one's gonna, I'm not gonna be a victim of a coffee house drive by or anything like that. I guess it
Yeah,
depends, right? Yeah.
it very much depends, and it's the important thing. It's still, as I said, 80 or more% are breached by an interaction with you, whether it's you clicking on a scam message or
Right.
installing something by yourself, or yeah, using the same insecure password in 15 different websites.
Hmm.
I think that's still more of a risk than anyone listening in a coffee shop, at
Okay.
least from a cybersecurity perspective. Then you have the whole data risk, privacy risks. That, of course, looks different. And if you look at Facebook's, I think, $1 billion fine in the EU, if you're in the right business,
Right. Yeah.
ignoring data privacy or individual privacy rights can get
Hmm.
quickly as expensive as a cyber attack. But that's more into business practice side than the
Yeah.
security space.
Let's talk business practices then for a minute. You mentioned a moment ago that, we should be encrypting our devices. We're talking about phones. Is it, or would you recommend that companies enforce a, you know, employee to put email on their phone or work assets on their phone if it isn't encrypted? And then how can we protect ourselves there? Because like to log into an iPhone, you have a 4 or 6 digit PIN, or in a lot of cases it's, face scan now, but they're a lot easier to break into, I would imagine, if one was misplaced or lost.
Actually, phones are relatively secure if they're well set up. It's
Okay.
a lockdown system. People were really afraid of them getting lost because they used to be a high value item even before we had smartphones. I mean, if you had Nokia brick phone in the 90s, that thing still costs $3,000.
Nothing was
Uh,
breaking that. Yeah.
and yes, but also if you left it on the subway, someone had your $3,000 phone and you had to explain to someone how you lost an asset, which, but if we
Mm,
take inflation, would cost today $10,000. So,
sure.
so it's kind of the security level of the phone has always been higher. I think we much more have to focus on laptops because computers used to stay in the office. Encryption has been optional for most people because if someone walks into the office at that point where it's a big desktop, someone could as easily take the manila folders from the wall and
Yeah.
had the same data without worrying about encryption. So I think the mindset about encrypting computers and encrypting something which I might forget with leaving just my back on a chair,
Mhm.
I think that's more important than the phone. But
Got
yes, we
it.
should encrypt devices, especially the ones who go out of the office, who go out of secure rooms, and who are in an area where people have access to, whether it's a shared office or whether it's someone commuting.
Got it. Okay. Um, I want to get practical for a second. I mean, we're talking about different tools and things people can do. We've talked about 2FA and multi-factor authentication. When it comes to protecting like your online identity, if you are in a coffee shop, we mentioned VPNs. What are some of the ones that you would recommend people are using that are maybe, been tested by yourself or, hold up better in the market?
I think starting again with our brains. If
Mm.
you have a breach, what do we get in the US? We get that little card which says, okay, here's $6 for you. And I think the first question always to ask is whether if I'm sharing something, is it worth more or less than $6?
Oh, it's
If
good.
it's worth more, then I might want to reconsider whether to share it because that's what I most likely get. Even so, the company pays out billions of dollars for data breaches. It's it doesn't get to me, unfortunately, the billions of dollars. Otherwise, we probably
Good.
neither of us would sit here.
Right.
We would be enjoying our cocktails on the beach.
I'd be laying back, yeah, my headset on, absolutely, or not. Um, are there any tools specifically for around VPNs that you recommend over others?
For the VPNs, I think the convenience question is one you mentioned. NordVPN, which
Hmm.
might be good if you're, especially here stateside, and want to go around. Europe has other ones where it makes more sense because they have more servers closer by. So it really depends on where the listener sits. And
Okay.
then thankfully, most of them have a month of a trial. So give it a month of a
Yeah.
try run.
Right. Yeah, because the speed thing definitely comes into play, right? If you have one activated, you can't, you're not getting the highest bandwidth, to your Zoom calls, let's say. So yeah, definitely testing them out. I used to use HMA. It's an acronym for Hide My Ass. And so I used that one for years, and it was this little caricature of a donkey that would pop up, and when the VPN was on, it would have like a mask on, and it was cute, but yeah, you could log in from different locations, and it had I can't remember what it was called, but it would like jump IPs every so often, right? And then if there was no connection, it would like drop out or switch or do something in the background. But I haven't seen a lot of the tools like really talking about that. But again, I think your advice is just test it out, try
Test it
something.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Um, you mentor founders and employees around the different aspects of cybersecurity, right? And so can you speak to maybe a success story? You were coaching, mentoring a team or a company that was in a certain place, and how you helped them to reshape the culture around cybersecurity at the more human level.
Yeah, I think especially on the founder level, and have to be careful with names here because
Or
it's
yeah,
SEC investment rules gripe and into some places.
okay.
I think we talked about it. One of the big aspects teaching someone is, okay, it happens. Let's not blame the person, but let's work on, okay, how do we communicate it out? How we tell our customers? How do we move forward? And I've seen it very much. I think in both the cases where one of my startups had that, and where I was kind of the investor with most cybersecurity experience. It's not just that the boss wants to blame someone instead of looking at moving forward. It's also that the employee wants to blame someone. So it's a lot of working with the people at that point, building culture around it, building culture of accepting, okay, these things happen. How can we minimize the impact? How can we build our communication strategies around them? And how can we really look forward of what to do now? And if we look at for big companies at the new SEC rules, all of them say, okay, you don't have to be the most secure company, but you have to have good communication practice. You have to give people the chance to act before someone uses your data breach to do bad stuff.
Mhm.
And I think most of the success stories I had were all around these kind of ideas where, okay, how can we not prevent it, but how can we be ready for when it happens? Because I think the new Verizon data breach report says 75% of companies will experience a breach every year.
Right.
So it's really, that's the
That's a
more
scary
important
number.
part. Okay, what do we do when it happens?
That's a scary number. So in these conversations, are you talking to IT admins, or are you talking to teams of individual contributors? And then how do you enforce this and train on this to create a real, culture around this?
It's most of the conversation are at either the management or at the board level.
Okay.
So it's often not how will you train it, but how do we build a strategy to train it? And culture in companies always has like two parts. One is what's enforced from above, what's coming from the bottom, and then working to build a strategy which matches the two, gives them feedback on the strategy at the board level to say, okay, did you really consider what your employees do, how your company is operating, or is it just you found a template on the internet, or your highly overpaid consultant, including myself, found a template for you and you're trying to mesh it now into, but there's that little aspect which we talked about 3 times what you want to change and you didn't consider that. So but it's in many cases, it's more asking the right question, listening to them and giving people the ideas of how to think about it than it's really to tell them what to do. Because in the end, no matter whether it's mentoring or whether it's board strategy, there are people who sit there and do that day to day. So,
Yeah,
and you can't sit there day to day. No one will pay you for that time. And quite frankly, that would probably take up from all the other stuff I'm doing. So it's
absolutely.
really making people more think about it, making them
Mhm.
reflect on it, and making them match it to who they are and what they want to achieve, then and giving them the freedom to act on it. And
Yeah,
sometimes as a mentor, you then get feedback of where you have to admit, okay, I've never thought about it that way, but that's a good idea. And I think that's the great thing about mentorships. Goes both ways. You learn a lot about what you're doing and whether you're doing a good thing or whether you maybe need to change a bit your approach.
right. Yeah, and at the end of it, we have to remember that we're all going to make mistakes, right? We can talk, we can communicate, and we can try our best and iterate over time, but we're all just humans, right? And prone to error as a result. Um, Something you mentioned earlier, I mean, we're talking about bringing ChatGPT into the conversation and how that's, shaking the foundations of online security. But in your opinion, how can like process automation play a role in cybersecurity to limit those human errors or redundancies or anything like that? Have there been any use cases that you've been involved with where automation has played a role?
Yeah, a lot of our identity things revolve getting double entries out, making automating identities, then working with our partners, whether it's Open Exchange or Nextcloud, to do the same for data duplication. And I wouldn't have thought I still need to say it in 2023, automating backups and data collection and data archiving, because all of these things are, whether it's data entry, whether it's identity, things which are really low value for an individual to do, but high stakes. And highly repetitive. So getting that then automated really takes out the human error, because it's the same data which goes everywhere. It's the same time the backup runs. It's the same data the backup needs to consider. So there isn't really a reason for a human to be in there. There isn't a reason for a human to sit there, oh my God, not again, to copy over the file and say, like, did I copy that one or not?
Mm.
And it's boredom is one of the worst enemies of secure practices. So getting these boring things out, getting people to do the high value tasks, getting them feel valued is,
Mm.
I think, the main goal of automation from a security standpoint. Of course, from business side, it's getting people to do stuff which brings more revenue.
Yes.
But yeah, from a security standpoint, it's get out boredom, get out repetition, get people to feel like they're doing something which has an impact.
Mm. What are some of the other trends that you're seeing, kind of emerge in regards to identity management, cybersecurity, and even automation?
Now that we are at least in an economic contraction, we've seen a lot of questioning of whether cloud is a good idea, and I think maturing of the question
Uh,
of the cloud, where you really see, okay, what's the total cost of ownership versus, okay, can I roll it out fast? Can I roll it out quickly and just have something which we saw, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, where people said, okay, we have to get a tool where you work remote. Here it is, no matter the cost, in 6 months.
yeah.
So kind of, yeah, maturing up there. And I have to admit, finally we're seeing the death of anyone putting in, we want to do crypto this and crypto that.
Yes. Yes. I haven't heard anyone talk about crypto or NFTs in months. Where did they all go? Where did they all go?
Yeah,
So, um, is cloud a good idea, or is it more just a necessary part of the equation because now we're all remote?
I think it very much depends on the size of your company and what you're doing. And I
Okay.
think we're seeing this consideration a lot more, where people think, okay, if I have the old pizza box servers standing in the closet and that thing runs at 90% load the whole day, that's a good case to make for having that pizza box still there, because the cloud will be a lot more expensive in that case. If your server says, okay, I'm idling 20 hours out of the day at 1% and then have 2 spikes of 2 hours, in that case, migrating to the cloud, getting that set up to spin up the machines when needed, it might be an investment at the beginning, but will pay off in the long term. And it's the same question then if you think about, okay, what's more energy efficient, not just price-wise, but what if you have to do carbon accounting because you're a big company, that might play in whether you get the carbon out or whether it's in your server room. But it's getting more into the question, okay, what's the total cost of cloud migration versus, okay, what's a quick fix to it? And I hope that will continue to be, because there are great things you can do with the cloud, but there's also a certain hype cycle which maybe overhyped some of the questions of, okay, cloud native company, and you go in and see, or the new CIO comes in and says, okay, we can save half our budget if we don't put everything in the cloud.
Right.
And that's, a bit of a
Interesting.
question why that hasn't happened before.
Do you work with B Corp organizations or ones that's aspiring to reach that status and reduce their carbon footprint? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's a very interesting space, both in terms of what they do to reach the space, but also in terms of how sometimes fluid these measures are of not just B Corp, but I think the whole ESG space has it a bit, okay, a moving target, which might be a good thing, but it also makes it sometimes frustrating if you see, okay, we finished that and it's obsolete now.
Yeah. No kidding. Let's talk to the future, Kevin. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are on where this industry is going. You've seen challenges, you've seen opportunities for growth, but where do you think we'll be in the future? You talked about Google Glasses being able to, decrypt things and read things that people don't have access to. What's next? What should we be looking out for? I know you're laughing. You've probably got a really good answer, and I'm excited to hear it.
I've yesterday read a very interesting article. What's the way most ChatGPT breaches have happened? It's 26,000 accounts have been compromised because people used insecure passwords and people get proprietary information out there. So as much as I would love to say, oh, quantum computing is saving us, AI will do changes, I'm sure in cybersecurity, it's been always hovering around 80% of human error. I'm sure 10 years from now, it will be still 80% of human errors.
Yeah.
It's just, we are so good at finding ways to making our life easier and more complicated in the long run. But apart from that, I think we'll see a lot more automation, a lot more tasks where people get augmented by computers, and we might see a revolution in how we do encryption, especially on the government level, because we get quantum chips which are less than $1 million for one data breach, which it's great for the US government to do it. It's peanuts for them, probably. It's not so much if we want to look into how can businesses or consumer utilize it.
Incredible. Kevin, thanks so much for your time today. I know I learned a lot. I'm taking down lots of notes. I'm going to have to revisit my VPN, password management, 2FA, and multi-factor authentication strategy for my company. So thanks for your time today and for sharing all of this. Definitely appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And where's the best place that people can connect with you if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Easiest way to reach me if you want a two-way conversation is LinkedIn. Otherwise, my personal website, korte.co, that's KORTE.co, has all the links to the latest articles and publications and podcasts where I've been on.
Perfect. And we'll be sure to have all those links in the show description. Kevin, thanks again. Appreciate your time. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.